Tonight, a concerted push by the AFN for a national inquiry into police violence against Indigenous people.
He was supposed to be charged with first degree and then second degree.
Calls for justice from a family in Saskatchewan after a man killed a woman who was expecting.
I salute them for the fact that they've opened up their archives more than most public archives are currently open.
And the release of residential school documents could one day bring more answers for families. I'm Chris Nachkate. Welcome to APTN National News. The Assembly of First Nations says 10 First Nations people were killed during interactions with police in Canada between August to November. On Tuesday, the AFN passed a motion to call for the federal government to launch an inquiry into these deaths and systemic racism in policing. As APTN's Savannah Craig reports, the families of victims were in Ottawa on Wednesday.
Never forget that call or the time that my son was never going to come home.
That's Edith Wells talking about when she received the call her son was dead. He died this past September in an altercation with Calgary police.
I am just so hurt, devastated, and shattered. And there's a big void in our community.
Mothers who lost their children during police interactions were invited to the Assembly of First Nations to share their experiences, including Edith Wells and Martha Martin. Martin lost her daughter Chantel Moore during a police interaction in 2020, and then lost her son Mike Martin while he was in police custody 5 months later. She says it's important for mothers to be part of the inquiry.
And being able to have those face-to-face conversations with leadership it's more touching than when you read about it in a newspaper.
First Nations chiefs across Canada are demanding for an end to the deaths of Indigenous people during police interactions.
And that's really what the chiefs are calling for from across this country, from coast to coast to coast, that the killing must stop.
In a unanimous vote at the AFN on Tuesday, chiefs are calling for the federal government of Canada to launch a national inquiry to look into these deaths. The motion was brought forth by Chief Alan Pulches and Chief Jerry Jack, a former officer.
And I got out of the RCMP after 17 years because I couldn't take the racism anymore.
The AFN says the next step is to meet with the federal government to launch this inquiry.
In our own land, we should feel safe. We shouldn't be threatened or afraid of police.
We call for the national inquiry so the AFN collaborate with the federal government. Because what is happening is systemic racism within provincial organizations policing.
National Chief Cindy Woodhouse-Nepenak says she has met with Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre to ensure this issue will be addressed if the Conservatives come into power next fall.
This is a black eye for Canada, and it's not acceptable for First Nations people.
Savannah Craig, APTN National News, Ottawa.
The two remaining members of the Métis National Council say they will carry on despite Métis Nation British Columbia pulling out of the organization last weekend. The Métis Nation of Ontario and Métis Nation Alberta are all that's left of the 40-year-old organization that is also currently leaderless. MNBC said the structure of the national body was no longer equitable, something the remaining members of MNC dispute. In a statement released by the MNC on Wednesday, Métis Nation of Ontario President Margaret Froh wrote, "Assertions that MNC is undemocratic or inequitable are both untrue and unjustified." The statement goes on to say the Métis National Council remains steadfast in its commitment to advancing the priorities of its member Métis governments and their citizens. The MNC will continue advocating for the shared priorities of its members' Métis governments. APTN News will continue to follow this story. The National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation will now have access to the personal records and documents of the Oblates of OMI Lacombe, Canada, after signing an agreement to bring truth to light for survivors of the Indian residential school system. With more, here's T.R. Wheatley.
Aspects of our ministry have caused harm.
In a small and intimate setting inside the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation, the Oblates of OMI Lacombe Canada have made a commitment to open up personnel records and documents to help the centre in its research. Father Ken Thorson leads OMI Canada. He said the Oblates first apologized to survivors back in 1991.
While this commitment was clear in its intention, we acknowledge that our follow-through has often been too slow.
With the agreement, the Oblates have committed to funding an archivist for the NCTR to help in the information transformation. In the past, files were protected and stayed closed for 50 years after a missionary died. Oblates CAO Rob Mailer said that is also changing.
From now on, the personnel files of Oblates who worked in the residential schools who have been deceased for at least 2 years will be shared with the National Centre.
Raymond Frogner, head of archives at NCTR, says this is a significant move by the Oblates.
I salute them for the fact that they've opened up their archives more than most public archives are currently open.
The Oblates arrived in Canada in 1841. There were over 700 missionaries in 40 residential schools, 299 in Quebec alone. To date, 80% of all handwritten journals have been digitized and transferred to the NCTR. Elder in residence Florence Painter is thankful to see this day come for survivors.
And we still see the impacts today. But that does not mean we shouldn't be proud of who we are. Our languages, our traditions, and our histories are really important to us.
While this relationship between the centre and the Oblates moves forward in reconciliation, Fragner says there is still much more truth to uncover with others.
The Sisters of St. Anne, the Sisters of Charity, the Grey Nuns, the Misericorde, and we would like to have a similar agreement with all of those groups.
To get as many records as they can so the true picture of Canada's dark history will come to light. T.R. Wheatley, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
A small community in Yukon was the center of attention recently after its newly elected municipal council refused to swear an oath of allegiance to the monarch. Sarah Connors tells us how their refusal led the territorial government to offer an alternative.
It was all smiles at Dawson City Council's swearing-in ceremony on Tuesday evening. The small community of 1,100 people in northwestern Yukon has received a lot of media attention lately. Last month, the newly elected council refused to swear the oath of allegiance to the king.
I did not intend for this to be a huge media phenomenon that it turned out to be. It's great that it did.
It all started with Councillor Darwin Lin, a member of the Trondok-Wichan First Nation living in Dawson City. Lin says he wasn't comfortable swearing the oath because of the Crown's history with Indigenous people.
I was hesitant on it. I actually sat there and I looked at it and I read it probably about 15 times. And it didn't get any easier to do.
Lin's 4 other fellow council members agreed, and they too declined to take the oath.
And I didn't want Darwin to be uncomfortable. And so I thought, I'm going to support him, damn it.
But that was a problem. Municipal councillors are legally required to take the oath within 40 days of being elected. If a solution couldn't be reached by December 9th, council seats would be considered null and void and a by-election would be called.
I didn't expect it to go as far as it did, but I think the conversation was needed to be had.
Yukon's Municipal Services branch had to come up with a solution, and fast. Its alternative? Municipal councillors can now swear an oath to the Constitution of Canada.
This change should help Yukon First Nations feel welcome and respected. It's a step in the ongoing journey towards reconciliation.
Lin is pleased with the alternative and the support from his fellow council members.
I don't think any of us thought that this is how we would start, but I'm happy it is how we started. It shows that we are a united team, and I'm happy with that.
Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
We're always looking for your feedback or story ideas. Here's how you can continue the conversation. If you have a story you want to share, send us an email to news@aptn.ca. To read and watch our stories, go to aptnnews.ca. You can find us online on your favorite social media sites, including TikTok, YouTube, LinkedIn, and X. Follow APTN News to join the conversation and see our latest stories. The Saskatchewan Public Safety Agency and the RCMP are both investigating this week following a number of deaths in 2 First Nations. Those stories when we come back. Welcome back. Last week in Saskatoon, the family of a pregnant woman who lost her life learned the fate of the man who killed their loved one. The family says he received only a slap on the wrist, and the sentence did not account for her unborn child, who was also killed when her mother died. APTN video journalist Rachel May reports.
She was a fun-loving, caring daughter who just wanted to help everybody, you know. She would give somebody a place to stay if they didn't have anywhere to go because she had a big heart.
Glenda Bear says her daughter Melissa was a loving mother to her 5 children and regularly helped others. Melissa Bear was 8 months pregnant with her 6th child when she was killed in Saskatoon on August 29, 2023 by her boyfriend Carrie Daniel Bluebell. On November 28, 2024, Bluebell pleaded guilty to manslaughter, receiving a 15-year sentence with 1.5 years credit. He is eligible for parole in 9 years. Allie Bear, a lawyer and family friend, says this sentence is another example of the justice system failing Indigenous women.
He was supposed to be charged with 1st degree and then 2nd degree, and now he ended up being charged with manslaughter. And that means that he gets time served. They sentenced him to 13.5 years, but including time served, he can apply for parole in 9 years.
Melissa's aunt Andrea Natauhau says the manslaughter conviction ignores baby Bear, the healthy 8-pound baby Melissa was carrying when she was killed.
And they say within the law, the baby girl wasn't a human being because she didn't take her first breath and she wasn't cut from the umbilical cord. But Carrie took that away. So where's the law in that? Carrie stole that from Melissa and baby's first breath. So there has to be a law for that to be in consideration, that he took that away from them. They have no choice.
Melissa Bear's family is calling for a law to be enacted that accounts for the unborn babies who die when their pregnant mothers are killed or murdered. Rachel May, APTN National News, Saskatoon.
2 people have died, including a teenage girl, following a house fire in a northern First Nation in Saskatchewan. On Tuesday at around 5:30 a.m., La Loche RCMP received a report of a house fire in the Clearwater River Dene Nation. A teenage girl was taken to hospital but later died. Another person, who has yet to be identified, was found dead inside the home. The Saskatchewan Public Safety Agency is now investigating the cause of the fire. Meanwhile, Chief Teddy Clark said the First Nation is organizing a crisis team to support the community and families involved. Clearwater River Dene Nation is located about 600 kilometers northwest of Saskatoon. RCMP in Saskatchewan are investigating after a man was found dead on the White Bear First Nation early Tuesday morning. At around 2:30 a.m. on Tuesday, Carlisle RCMP received a report of an injured person at a residence in White Bear. When officers arrived, they found the body of a 33-year-old man from the town of Cornack. Saskatchewan RCMP Major Crimes is now investigating and deeming the death as suspicious. RCMP says there will be an increased police presence in White Bear this week. Anyone with information on the death is asked to contact RCMP or Crime Stoppers. White Bear First Nation is located about 200 kilometers southeast of Regina. A nonprofit dedicated to increasing internet connectivity in Indigenous communities just got a $600,000 upgrade. The Indigenous Connectivity Institute launched back in 2022. It's led by Clear Sky Connections, an Indigenous-owned telecommunications company based in Winnipeg. On Wednesday, the Institute received $600,000 from TD Canada Trust to support an initiative called Nalaktuk, Developing an Indigenous Workforce. It officially launched in September and runs until August 2026. The funding will help the organization deliver specialized tech training and education to Indigenous youth, with the hopes to boost the Indigenous IT sector. Mark Buell is a senior advisor for the Institute and explains how the money will help remove barriers.
The biggest barrier that we found in connecting communities and bridging the divide is a lack of an Indigenous workforce, right? There's a lack of people in IT globally. If you're talking rural and remote communities, like most Indigenous communities are, the lack of people to build, operate, and maintain the networks is a significant barrier. So earlier this year, we launched our workforce development initiative to really shake up the system of how people are trained to build, operate, and maintain networks. The support from TD is going to help us greatly in moving forward, getting Indigenous youth into really good careers that will help their communities move forward, that will bring opportunity to communities.
A number of Indigenous artists are sending their work to the moon. We'll tell you why when we're back in less than 3 minutes. Stay with us. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. Just before the snow fell in Winnipeg, Manitoba, our Jesse Andrushko had a close encounter with a deer in his neighborhood as it munched on the remains of a pumpkin. Thank you, Jesse, for snapping that pic. Send us your photos to share at aptn.ca for your chance to be our next photo of the day. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the east, Charlottetown 7, Fredericton 3. Nuujauak, -13. La Grande River, -13 there as well. Val d'Or, -2. Saint Jovite, -1. Ottawa, 0. Sarnia, -1. Timmins, -3. Sioux Lookout, -11. Puckatawagan, -16. Thompson, -17. Dauphin, -10. Princess Harbor, -12. Swift Current, -2. Yorkton, -7. Meadow Lake, -3. Buffalo Narrows, -4. High Level, -12. Peace River, +1. 5 in Edmonton. Red Deer, -1. Campbell River, 7. Tofino, 10. -2 in Dees Lake. Prince Rupert, 10. Dawson, -11. Beaver Creek, -20. -9 in Wati, Wrigley, -12. Inuvik, -18, Colville Lake, -9. Cambridge Bay, -26, Baker Lake, -30. And Resolute, -23, Agulik, -21. A capsule of Indigenous music will soon find a home on the moon. The Lunar Codex Indigenous Music Collection is scheduled to launch as early as November 2025, and there's still time for Indigenous musicians to submit their work. Reporter Sarah Bettens has the story.
It's bringing a new meaning to Out of This World. Next year, a capsule containing Indigenous music will be launched on a NASA mission to the moon. It's a collaboration between the Lunar Codex, the estate of Norval Morrisseau, Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Canada. Corey Dingle, the CEO of the Morrisseau estate, said the project is a reflection of the late Anishinaabe artist.
This is a continuation of Norval Morrisseau's vision that he had early on in his life to document, to preserve, and to share the Indigenous culture. And so we cannot think of a better way to preserve the culture than putting it on a lander on the solar polar ice cap of the moon for 1 billion years.
Blake Andrekoneb is an Anishinaabe artist from Laxal First Nation in Ontario. He's working on the visual art for the project.
The CEO of the state of Norval Morrisseau reached out to me and asked if I knew any Indigenous musicians and if I could link him so they could put their music on the moon. we started talking, and then he offered me to do the cover art for it.
Anjikona blends elements of the Woodland School with pop culture.
I've just been thinking a lot about space and obviously the moon, but I'm thinking back to my early childhood where I wanted to be an astronaut, stuff like that. So it's like, gonna have fun with this piece and just see what happens when I draw.
Canadian physicist Samuel Peralta founded the Lunar Codex during the COVID pandemic. The Codex buys space on NASA rockets to launch art to the moon.
And we basically found a way to miniaturize and archive the art and put them into payloads and send them to the moon. When my friends in the arts heard that, they were elated.
Sending a kilogram of material to the moon can cost over $1 million US. So the works are printed on nanofish, a technology that can store over 1,000 works of art on a disc about the size of a quarter. Peralta says nanofish can last over 1 billion years.
If I bring this up close, you're going to see little dots on that. And every dot on that piece of nickel the size of a quarter is actually a page.
After launching 3 capsules into space, Peralta felt it was important to incorporate Indigenous art.
So I was on another interview similar to this when the announcer asked me if I could have any artist in the world, what artist would I like? And immediately I said, Indigenous artists. Right after that, I got a call or an email from the estate of Norval Morrisseau.
A capsule including some Indigenous visual art, including a piece by Mi'kmaq Ellen Sillaboy, landed on the moon in February. The Codex is now into a 7th capsule called Polaris. Sound waves of songs by Indigenous musicians will be on it and sent to the moon. Jessica Svenningsson is a project lead.
Going to the moon is not easy. And if we're willing to put all this time, effort, and energy into saving something, that means it was something important to us. And so I would like to think if someone came across this in the future, whether it was human or extraterrestrial, then they would take away that this was important and this was something that we really cared about.
Indigenous musicians have until December 31st to submit their work.
If you're an Indigenous musician, I highly urge you to go to the website, officialmorrisseau.com, and try to get your music on the moon.
Songs will be selected in January 2025, and the Polaris capsule will tentatively launch next November. Sierra Bettens, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
And finally for us, a First Nation in Western Manitoba is celebrating this week after a number of bison have returned after more than a century. These bison were released on Tuesday in the Birdtail Sioux Dakota Nation thanks to a donation from their neighbors of the Sioux Valley Dakota Nation. A total of 11 bison were given to Birdtail, including a sacred white female calf. Many people from the community were very emotional and celebrated as the bison were released to a bison song. Birdtail Dakota Nation is located about 130 kilometers northwest of Brandon. Congratulations to the Birdtail Sioux Dakota Nation. You'll have to invite us over for bison stew one of these days. And that's your newscast for this Wednesday, December 4th. We're back tomorrow for your daytime newscast. Make sure to join us then. Hi miigwech kwana. Thank you for watching. We'll see you again. Next day.